Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start in about 3 minutes. Welcome to the afternoon panel discussion. I'm Bill Hamblett, the Editor-in-Chief of Proceedings at the Naval Institute. Just ask you to please silence your electronic devices now. Take your seats and we'll get started in just a minute.
How'd that sound, Admiral, to you? Great, cool. They'll all be roughly around that. Sure. Yeah, you sound great. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll just talk loudly.
Welcome to the afternoon panel. The title of this one is What Lessons Are We Learning from Ukraine and the Red Sea, and How Will They Drive Future Requirements? Moderating today's panel is Admiral Sandy Winnefeld, U.S. Navy retired, well known to this crowd and a longtime proceedings author, starting when he was a midshipman at Georgia Tech. Admiral Winnefeld was an F-14 pilot, a Top Gun instructor. He commanded at the Squadron Aircraft Carrier Strike Group, a numbered fleet level. And he finished his active duty career as the 9th Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, retiring in 2015. And since then, he has done a number of different things in academia. He's written books. He's served as the chair of the President's Intelligence and Advisory Board. And we've got a lot to cover, and so I will turn it over to Admiral Winnefeld now. Sir, the panel's yours.
All right, thank you very much, Bill. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, all right, great. Well, first of all, congratulations to the Naval Institute, Ray Spicer and the team for putting together another fantastic West event. It's really important to the naval services and our allies and partners that you do this, and in such a beautiful place like San Diego, so thank you very much for that. So we have a really good topic today. What have we learned from the wars in Ukraine and Red Sea and elsewhere? And you know, the military is very often accused of fighting the last war. And you know, to be sure, we have to look at very closely at the next war, whatever that might be, in its own unique context. But we also have to take time to learn from what's going on right now. And I would submit that there are sort of three major areas that we have to look at. One is the geopolitical sort of macro strategic area. And then of course there's the tactical and the technical sides of what we do in our business. We have to understand what fits and what doesn't fit into the context of what we might see in the future. And we also have to be very, very careful not to jump to conclusions. I'd also say it's very hard for we military folk to understand that sometimes those geopolitical and technical and tactical realities can change. One of my favorite quotes is from British historian Liddell Hart, who said, "The only thing harder than getting a new idea into the military mind is getting an old idea out." And so we're all trying to avoid that. So we're going to have a great conversation today, bounded because there's so much we could talk about around the world, with the potential for conflict with the People's Republic of China. Joining me are two very, very highly qualified experts to talk about the lessons that we've learned and what they really mean for what the Navy and Marine Corps are going to be asking for in the future. On my left is a career naval aviator, Vice Admiral Dan Dwyer, on his 4th Naval Institute panel at West, by the way. He's the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Operations, Plans, and Strategy and Warfighting Development. That is a massive job. Combine 2 previous 3-stars into one job. I can't imagine that you're getting any sleep. But he operates right in the very center, in the heart of these questions. And joining us from Gibraltar, from the 6th Fleet and Naval Forces Europe, is Rear Admiral Michael Mattis, who you should be able to see on a screen. And he is the commander of Task Force 66, Director of Strategic Effects, U.S. Naval Forces Europe and U.S. Naval Forces Africa. And I love this because when I was the 6th Fleet commander, we didn't have a job that was Director of Strategic Effects, and it's really good that they've taken that step. And again, he's joining us virtually. He's got a meeting with his British counterparts in Gibraltar going on, and we appreciate you being here. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. And I hope that you'll be ready to ask some great questions. And I've got 2 caveats for the audience as you think of what questions you're going to ask. The first one is it must be a question, not a sermon. Second of all, I would ask that in a time of transition in our country between one administration and another, that we try to avoid politically charged questions that might get our guests in hot water. And if I hear that, I'm going to cut it off and rescue our guests from that kind of thing. We're really here to talk about warfare and what's going to happen in the future. So, I mentioned earlier there were 3 categories. There's geopolitical, there's technical and tactical. We're going to enter this conversation by talking first through the lens of geopolitics. So let's enter that way. We learned in Ukraine a geopolitical lesson where the United States responded with all elements of national power: economic, diplomatic, informational, intelligence, and military. But the military power we responded with was indirect. Why? Probably partly because Ukraine is a partner, not a technical ally, partly because Russia has nuclear weapons and actually threatened to use them, and third, because there was a little bit of domestic political softness in support for Ukraine. And that caused us to be a little bit more cautious. So I would ask, have we learned a lesson from this conflict about what might happen with Taiwan, where our partner there is a partner, not a formal treaty ally, where we have an opponent that has nuclear weapons, and who knows what the American public is going to think about intervening in that war, which at the either end of strategic ambiguity means we have to be prepared for all in or something else. So I wanted to ask our experts here, what are you thinking, what are you hearing in that context? And I thought I would start with Dan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Admiral. I think this is on. I appreciate your introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak. As you mentioned, this is my 4th panel at West. Always a great opportunity to come here and interact with you all and discuss what's going on in the Pentagon, what's going on with your Navy today. And before I answer your question directly, I just, as maybe not a paid political announcement, but just to let our audience know that this year, in 2025, your Navy is celebrating its 250th birthday. Yes, 250 years, and everyone here knows the importance of a strong Navy because we are a maritime nation, and we depend on a free and open global commons to ensure our nation is prosperous. So this year we're going to highlight what our Navy, what your Navy does for our great nation. And as we start talking about what you're alluding to, Admiral, is this changing character of warfare. And we've all read about that recently, especially after what we watch is happening in the Black Sea and the Red Sea. But the changing character of warfare, as we all know, has gone on since combat first began millennia ago. And if we look at our own nation, when we transition from sail to steam, from cannon to rifled guns, to aircraft carriers, to ballistic missile defense, and everything has changed. In our lifetime, sir, when we started flying aircraft, we didn't have smart weapons.
Nope.
And now we can't imagine not fighting without them. And as we watch what has happened in the Black Sea with a nation that largely doesn't have its own Navy, has essentially denied the Black Sea to the Russian Federation,
Yeah.
a nation with the Navy, through the use of disruptive technologies, particularly with robotic and autonomous systems. And you can see the effect that that has had in the Black Sea. And then we look at the Red Sea and what's going on there, and we look at a nation state or non-nation state with the Houthi rebels attempting to influence the commerce in the Red Sea with those same disruptive technologies. And it's been the United States Navy that has been on patrol there for now 15 months, ensuring that the Red Sea, that strategic waterway, remains open. And in 14 months, with continual attacks from the Houthis, your Navy has maintained a perfect record. And so what's the difference between the two? And it comes down to the people. It comes down to the training. It shows you that disruptive technologies are not the end-all be-all. They're not the way of the future. Not if your force is well trained how to combat and defend against these new and different technologies. Without a doubt, we're going to have to incorporate these new technologies into our fleet. I'll talk about that a little bit later as we talk about what our Navy is doing with force design. But when we compare and contrast the Black Sea and the Red Sea, it really comes down to the people. It comes down to your training. It comes down to how you process information. In the end, it's all about decision advantage. How quickly can you get the information in to make an informed decision on how to proceed against that particular problem? And without a doubt, what Rear Admiral Mattis and his team at CTF 66 has been doing is no more relevant and very appropriate for this panel. So thank you, Admiral.
Great. I'm going to turn to Mike here in just a moment because we do have a lot of questions about what's happened in Ukraine and what we've learned from that. But I want to drill in a little bit specifically to the Red Sea. We've had tremendous success out there. As you said, we got a 100% record. What are we learning? How are our systems performing? What is the command and control like? How do you think about extending that sort of microcosm of what a war with China would be like onto a larger stage?
Right, and so, as I said, the Red Sea, first the USS Carney defended against the first ballistic missile attack over 15 months ago, but it wasn't 15 months ago that we realized we need to figure out how to fight against this. The Navy, we've been looking at this for decades. How do we train our operators? How do we train our sailors? How do we take this broad capability that any potential adversary can have and not only defend against it, but also neutralize it? And so with the stand-up of our Warfare Development Commands, Navy Air Warfare Development Command, Top Gun, SMIDIC out in San Diego, UWITIC for undersea, IWITIC for information work, the best of all of our officer corps and our senior enlisted come together and figure out how to combat these new and disruptive technologies. And so when we sailed as JOs, we go out on deployment, we come back, we do a post-deployment brief, we'd say what worked and what didn't work, and then in months' time or years' time, we get changes. Well, today we're doing that same process, but in hours. After every attack in the Red Sea, the information goes off board the ship, back for our Warfare Development Commands, back to Dahlgren. We look at our sensor tapes, the information, the parameters, how we conducted that fight, and how can we improve our systems from system settings or software updates in real time. And this is the key advantage of any future conflict, is how do we take and absorb what we see, adapt it, make it better, and get it back into the warfighter's hands. And this is what we're seeing each and every day after every attack in the Red Sea today.
Are you seeing anything, and I'll turn to you in a second, Mike, about future warfighting requirements? For example, as you scale this up to a larger battlefield, are you seeing, with the tremendous depletion rates of very expensive weapons, a need for more directed energy, for example? And what form would that take? Are you all exploring that as well?
Absolutely. Everything is on the table. Because as we develop our own techniques and tactics and procedures, our adversaries are watching and changing the way they fight. And so it's always an evolution. And so everything is on the table, as you mentioned, directed energy and other EW, cyber, space. How do we use all domains to go after this one problem? If we look at what's happening in Ukraine, it's largely one-dimensional, single domain, largely land and air. But if we look at other areas like the Red Sea, it's multi-domain. It's space, it's cyber, it's undersea, it's on the sea, it's in the air. And so how do we bring all domains to bear, and how do we iterate and improve our processes at speed so that we can have the advantage in any future attack?
So Mike, speaking of Ukraine, you've had a front row seat, and I know it must have been really interesting for you to watch how that war has evolved. I remember in 2014, Bob Work and I are stressing small, smart, lethal things. And we've seen that in spades with Stinger missiles, Javelin missiles, the crude anti-surface ship missile that sank the Russian ship Moskva, which I was very delighted to see because I toured that ship when I was the 6th Fleet commander. How are you seeing Ukraine evolve their warfighting capability? This small, maybe less sophisticated military turning into kind of a technical behemoth. What have you seen out there?
Yeah, Admiral Winterfeld, thank you for having me on the panel, and great to see Admiral Dwyer again as well. I'm privileged to be here. Before I jump in and answer your question directly, let me step back and help inform the audience. Recently, Admiral Munch, a few weeks ago, sort of really revealed for the first time some of the work that my task force is working on. And so within my task force, I have, there's really two elements to it. There's Task Force 166, which I'm working on for Admiral Munch. We work on the NAV, and I focus on capability, joint and combined all-domain integration necessary for execution and support of our allies and partners. And Ukraine, again, just recently revealed, is a partner. And I've been a senior military officer that is working that problem set with our Ukrainian partners. And it's been a privilege and an honor to do that with them out there. I also have Task Force 66, which works for Vice Admiral Anderson at 6th Fleet, and it's focused really on integration and training of the capabilities that we're helping Ukraine with, and then getting them up to speed to be able to take those on as well. And so a lot of learning going on with our team, a lot of help to the partners there, and it's been a phenomenal experience. So from my front row seat, those small things that Bob Work and you were thinking about a decade ago are playing big dividends. And let me just talk about some of the effects we've seen. Essentially, a nation that wasn't expected to survive days, much less a week, has managed in the maritime, and I'm going to stay focused on the maritime because that's really where my security assistance support resides, and as well as I think it's most pertinent to this conversation. Ukraine had 4 objectives in this war that they sought to achieve using these sort of asymmetric means. The first was to prevent invasion from sea. And they did that really initially with mines and coastal defense cruise missiles. And so far, this has been achieved as the Russians have backed off the idea of an amphibious invasion near Odessa. Again, early on, it was really just keeping the amphibs away from the shore and giving them doubt on whether an amphibious invasion would occur. After the retaking of Snake Island, it was pretty clear that the Ukrainian armed forces had sort of regained advantage. And I'd offer that Ukraine has done a phenomenal job of integrating all domain effects. We saw that in their campaign to retake Snake Island. Very challenging for them to do that, but with security assistance and coaching, frankly, they did a spectacular job of integrating air and surface, and long-range fires to essentially defeat the Russian forces on that island. And again, their second objective is to really prevent missile attacks from sea. Most of those are coming from their surface ships and kilos that are launching the caliber missiles. And so far, the attacks by the Russians have been significantly diminished. We saw initially a great volley of fires coming from the sea in 2022, and then a drop off in 2023 as Ukraine had increasing success with unmanned robotic and autonomous systems in the Black Sea against the Russian fleet. And in 2024, frankly, the Russians have been bastioned in Novorossiysk in the eastern Black Sea and have been very challenged to come out and do strikes. Some still occur, but at a much diminished rate. The third objective that Ukraine achieved was to prevent blockade. If you remember, in the beginning of the conflict, Ukraine and Russia came to a tentative agreement with the Black Sea Grain Initiative to allow grain to flow. But in July of 2023, that grain initiative fell apart, and we initially saw some kinetic activity with Ukraine, essentially trying to defend from Russian surface ship activity, blockading sort of outside of the mouth of the Bosporus in the southwest portions of the Black Sea. And Ukraine was effective with small numbers of USVs in not sinking these ships, but bruising them, hitting them, and impacting. And so again, mission successful. And then the last effect that we've seen is preventing resupply ashore. The reality is that the Tartus Express, the Syrian Express as we sometimes call it, of supply to Syria was coming through the Black Sea. And in 2024, we saw that come to a near end. And recently we saw essentially the collapse of support in Tartus, which we're now seeing the Russians having to essentially retreat from what was a bastion in the Mediterranean. And their main support sector came from the Black Sea. So what I'm seeing Ukraine do is achieve their effects by constantly generating innovative new approaches to the fight that have evolved substantially from initially sea denial with mines and coastal defense cruise missiles to then seeing some effective hits of Russian ships with small numbers of USVs to sort of the magical window that they had between July 31st of 2024 and the middle of March of 2024. In those 6 weeks, they sank 3 Russian ships using a large number of USVs in each attack, about 10 plus, and each ship was hit by at least 4 to 6, with at least 2 going through the same hole, demonstrating those capabilities were there. And then what we've seen since then is Russia really retreats in their bastion in Novorossiysk, but Russia really putting an enormous amount of tactical air and rotary wing air in the Black Sea to defend against USVs. And just a few weeks ago, we saw Ukraine counter with unmanned surface vessels that have counter air capabilities. So this fight has continued to evolve as the capabilities require new tactics, techniques, and procedures, new innovative capabilities being put on the battlefield. It is much more like the IED fight of Iraq and Afghanistan, where it is action, reaction, counteraction, and the only way to stay ahead of this fight is with innovation and constantly changing both your tactics and your capabilities. I'll stop there, sir.
Okay, Mike, just so perhaps some lessons for requirements for not only the U.S. Navy, but also some of our allies and partners in how Ukraine was successful in basically defending themselves from an invasion seems to apply pretty well to the situation in the Indo-Pacific. Can I ask you, you have spent a certain amount of time in your career on space. When we think of space, we think of precision navigation and timing, we think of communications, and we think of sensing. Have we learned anything in this conflict about dependence on space, including potential use of commercial space, because we have a lot of people in attendance here who are interested in that, or other aspects of space you might have learned?
Yes, sir, absolutely. First off, I would say that the ability to leverage commercial space has been game-changing in the fight for Ukraine. Again, we saw that early on, where some of the USV attacks were actually stopped by Starlink no longer allowing some signals within the territorial areas of Ukraine or Russia, which thwarted the Ukrainian activities there. And again, essentially a commercial capability in Starlink being weaponized as a capability for war. And what we saw was Elon Musk and Starlink really shifting, realizing they needed to change their business model to Star Shield, that was authorized, if you will, for military use explicitly, and would provide sort of more of a business case and use for that. So absolutely critical in this environment to have that proliferated low Earth orbit capability. And clearly the Ukrainians have been using that to great effect. But again, the policy and sort of business implications have been, I think, a little surprising to everyone. The second thing I would offer is the GPS environment in the Black Sea is as rancid as it can get. I think you're probably familiar with how bad it is in the Eastern Mediterranean. What we see in the Black Sea is even worse. And as a result, there's really had to been innovative use and technological evolution of how to work around these problem sets. I can't get into the specifics due to classification, but what I can say is the need to constantly evaluate the technology that's being put into both communications and precision navigation timing is essential to us staying ahead. And part of that is in iterations of capabilities. What we're seeing Ukraine do is essentially evolve capabilities, and as the threat gets worse, finding new and innovative ways to work around it. In land combat, we've seen things like essentially going to fiber optic cable connected to unmanned aerial drones. Harder to do in the maritime, but it wouldn't surprise me if like that becomes a solution at some point. So again, the ability to maintain comms and PNT essential. And then the last thing I'd offer is that the innovative capabilities that they're bringing are continuing to evolve based on the threat that the adversary throws at them. So initially it was against surface ships. Now it's largely focused, and that was focused on lethality. Initially unsuccessful. They had a few sinkings to drive the lethality, and now the Russians countered with tactical air, and now they're working on survivability to enable lethality. These are micro lessons that we are leveraging to learn about how to think about this problem in Indo-PACOM. Over.
Okay, one more question before I invite the audience, so please be lining up at the microphones if you have a question. Dan, I wanted to ask you specifically about Ukraine. You know, for 20 years, we had total air dominance over Afghanistan, and maybe got a little complacent about that. Ukraine is a much different environment. Frankly, it's very difficult for the TAC air in that country, whether it's Russian or Ukrainian, to survive. We have much better systems, F-35, F-22 and the like, but give me a sense for how you're looking at that through the lens of future combat. Are we in a standoff world now, or can we still go in there and duke it out inside an air defense system?
That's a great question, Admiral. Thank you. So, you know, most of my career, and as you alluded to, your career, you know, we had air and maritime superiority wherever we sailed. Right? When we were off Afghanistan, when you had the USS Enterprise off Afghanistan, you weren't worried about the maritime or the air. You were worried about launching strikes in Afghanistan, supporting soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines on the ground there. But now, as we look, now 3 decades removed from the end of the Cold War, as we are posturing ourselves from moving away from power projection in a permissive environment to one of a global sea control. And without global sea control, you know, our adversary can deny us maneuverability. And when we don't have global sea control or local sea control, it's about sea denial, denying the sea to our adversaries. So in the Pentagon right now, CNO has asked us and commissioned us to develop a force design for the future. As we move from this permissive power projection to sea control, sea denial mindset, how do we build the fleet for the future to go after those 2 different approaches? And so, and if we think about in 2045, that's just 20 years from now. And if you think about where we were 20 years ago in 2005, you know, this was just coming online, right? Can you imagine doing anything without this? And so it's going to come quick. And with that, about 60% of the fleet that we have today will still be in service in 2045. If we were to stop building aircraft carriers today, they would still be in service till almost 2090. And so how do we adapt the fleet we have for this new mission of sea control, sea denial, using the exact same methods and techniques that Admiral Mattis was alluding to in that approach? We've done this our entire careers. We've taken aircrafts, we slapped FLIR pods on them to deliver precision guidance. The first F-18s I flew did not have GPS in it. My second deployment, we were dropping GPS-guided bombs because we found a way to adapt that in air. So we are constantly upgrading the equipment, and we need to do the same thing towards this changing character warfare and approach to global sea control. Robotic and autonomous systems that Admiral Mattis was mentioning, that is the future. It's not the end. It's not all robotic and autonomous. It is both manned and unmanned working together. Every system that we field in the future must have an autonomous counterpart. And we're doing that today in the undersea, on the sea, and in the air. Everything we have has an autonomous counterpart. So as we develop new capabilities, they need to be shared amongst all the domains. because it is your Navy that operates in all domains, and it's the only service that operates from seabed to space. And so how do we leverage these disruptive technologies and incorporate them into everything we do? And this is what we're thinking that's happening as the CNO approaches her force design for 2045.
Thank you. So I see we have somebody who might be flirting with a microphone. Come on over, ask a question.
Admirals, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. Patrick Nansen, CEO for Maritime Operations Group. Want to ask you, with the great focus on the conflict in Ukraine and the lessons we're learning there, what's the best way to translate those lessons to the Indo-Pacific, which I think is on everyone's mind as the most existential threat? And I say this because I was at Brookings Institute last month with Admiral Paparo, and he made a very interesting comment about small lethal systems, and I'll paraphrase his comments. Small lethal systems don't help me in an 8,000 square mile battle space. They help me in a very confined battle space. So how do we make sure we're learning the right things to apply these lessons in a very different theater?
This is the tech bro question.
Yeah, exactly. And so it gets back to my point of, and actually Admiral Mattis made a very good point about operation, reaction, counteraction. You know, how do you every time that they'll conduct an operation, the very next mission has to be something new, because the adversary can evolve quickly and provide a defense or a capability to deny that capability to ourselves. So how do we build our systems that we can, learn from the attack and quickly update them and upgrade them for the new technique or procedure? Admiral Winnefeld asked about, what about operating in a Navy in a denied environment when we're used to operating in a permissive environment for the last 3 decades? We're still going to operate in that environment. Admiral Kaler says very eloquently every time you heard him speak, we're used to operating in a WES. We always operate in a weapon engagement zone, but we develop capabilities and techniques to allow us to survive and be successful. And so incorporating small, medium, and large disruptive technologies or autonomous systems into everything we do is the way of the future, whether it's in the Western Pacific, the Red Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean, the North Atlantic. This is the approach that we must take going forward in the future. I don't know, Admiral
Mike,
Matt?
do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, let's just caveat where what we're calling non-traditional sea denial works and where it doesn't work. This is not something that's going to work in the broad Atlantic or in the Philippine Sea. 1 million square miles of open ocean with no land around it, not helpful for the operational reach of the current set of robotic autonomous systems that we see. Where will it work? Well, it'll certainly work in the Black Sea, certainly in the Baltic. Eastern Med is a likely place where it could work as well. And in the Indo-PACOM AOR, I think Celebes and Sulu Sea, I think First Island Chain, particularly the Straits, are all relevant areas where the operational reach is appropriate and sea denial capabilities can be integrated together. Again, it's not just about robotic autonomous systems. Let's look what Ukraine did. It's about mining, it's about coastal defense cruise missiles, it's about integration of unmanned undersea, on the surface, in the air, in an integrated manner in time and tempo, with other effects, space and cyber and other things. It's an all-domain fight. And so the fact that we're extending it to robotic autonomous systems is important. Now, a key difference between what we see in Ukraine and what it will clearly be the problem set in Indo-PACOM, and I'll just offer, I routinely talk to NAVACOM and PAC fleet staffs to keep them appraised of what we're seeing and learning. And I also closely work with Naval Postgraduate School and Naval War College on the lessons that we're learning and how we maintain the innovation curve, so that it's not just my CTFs that are looking at these problem set, but we actually have folks that are objectively thinking about them and sort of flattening the curve between what we're seeing in EUCOM and what we're likely going to see in Indo-PACOM. The scope and scale of the fight in Indo-PACOM is massively different. The number of drones that we're looking at to be relevant, for example, to buy time in an island campaign that China, might attempt. If you listen to Xi and the PRC leadership, I think there is the numbers that would be necessary to dissuade an amphibious invasion in Taiwan are significantly greater. The autonomy required would be significantly greater than that which we are seeing in the Black Sea. So clearly the capabilities that are in play in the Black Sea, in both the number and in the actual capability themselves, are insufficient for the fight in Indo-PACOM today. However, the evolution that we're seeing is giving us great insights. So for example, a point solution of unmanned surface vessels to solve the problems in Indo-PACOM don't work. Why? Because in order to get lethality, I have to have survivability, which means if I'm going to have unmanned surface vessels, what is my answer to the adversary's ability to bring rotary wing and TAC air to attrite those while they're en route to their kill zone or kill box, if you will? That's the kind of thinking and learning and the evolution of the problem set that we're seeing. What we know for sure is that it's impossible to predict where this will go, but that it will change. The other thing I'd offer is that buying a lot of mass of the same thing isn't necessarily the best idea. We're seeing buys of 10, 25, 50, and then evolving the technique between those sprints as necessary to stay up with the fight. If nothing else, changing out the components for comms and building more resilience into the PNT environment as well as improving the autonomy and the things like automatic target recognition and other capabilities that will clearly evolve. So the ability to iterate and innovate our way to the problem set is probably what we're going to need to do in Indo-PACOM, but mass is required and scope and scale to get the operational reach is going to be required as well. So very different from what we're seeing in the Black Sea, but it's certainly pointing in directions that we can learn from and that we must take away.
So I would build very quickly on that point by trying to pull us back into the geopolitical level, where if we find that a conflict with China is similar to Ukraine in that we provide indirect support, that all of these diabolical things that we, people in this room, can be developing, small, smart, lethal things, are things that we have to get to Taiwan early on, and we have to be able to reinforce them very quickly we can't just hand them off to them at the last second. So I think there is a place to your answer for those small, smart, lethal things, but we may be developing them for a place like Taiwan and handing them off to them. I want to get another, I want to get another question out. Gentleman standing behind you, sorry.
I'm Kai Alberg, U.S. Naval Institute. Using $2 million missiles to shoot down $200,000 or $20,000 drone swarms is probably not a winning strategy. What kind of means would you wish you were provided to defend against drone swarms if China were to employ them against U.S. naval assets? Are directed energy weapons, lasers, the answers, or adaptation of the phalanx system? Or what do you think can be fielded by 2027 to provide an effective defense?
Yes, and all the above. It's going to be a all-domain solution to go after these disruptive technologies, whether the drone swarms in the air, on the sea, under the sea, or other disruptive technologies that come along. It's all about adapting what we have and bringing everything to bear. So whether you mentioned directed energy, is it small cluster munitions, is it EW, is it non-kinetic means, is it space-based, is it always being on the defensive or going on the offensive? Shooting the archer or the arrow. And so, an expensive missile to take out a drone, but do we want to allow that drone to have a hit and put American lives at risk? And so, yes, all day we will defend ourselves at any means possible, but what we have learned in the last 15 months of continuous presence now on our 5th Carrier Strike Group in the Red Sea, defending that strategic waterways, is that our sailors, our junior officers, supported by the infrastructure at the Warfare Development Commands, have learned new and unique ways, I'll leave it at the unclassified level, to deal with these disruptive technologies so that the exchange ratio is not so great, but not having Americans at risk. And so that gets back to my point is everything has to be manned and unmanned, whether it's in defense or offensive, to go after these disruptive technologies that we're seeing both in Ukraine, in the Black Sea, the Red Sea, and around the world in the Western Pacific.
I actually have a pretty strongly held opinion on this, to be honest with you, if I can add. I think we need all the kinetic things that we've worked, you know, the SM-6s, the SM-3s, the everything we've got, but we have to augment it with directed energy. And I've written an article in Proceedings about this. When people think directed energy, they lunge for lasers. Well, lasers are great short-range weapons, but they don't like bad weather. You have to have dwell time, so you can only go one target at a time. And the power is not there to do long range. So to me, high-powered microwaves are, and what I like to call ultra-high-powered microwaves, which are within the art of the possible, are an exceptional addition to this. In my humble opinion, having retired, is that we're going too slow on that. We're going to try to integrate it into a DDG deck house when, in fact, we could put a portable system on an LCS very easily and immediately augment our ability to defend ourselves, because we're going to have to do that, as Admiral Dwyer points out, on a grand scale. If we go into a combat with an adversary like China. We have another question, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'll get you next.
Vice Admiral, Rear Admiral, it's good seeing you. Dr. Andre Stradar, and I work at U.S. Indo-PACOM, J7 in the PIMTEC program. What I captured here today as far as lessons coming out of Ukraine is certainly that, again, from the operation, reaction, counteraction statements and the need for innovation or continued innovation as we proceed. I'm questioning if we're set up with the Goldwater's Nichols and the way our current acquisitions process is, if we're set up for success to continue that process in whatever region we end up having conflict.
It's a really good question. Let's answer it quickly, because I got one more I want to get before we're finished, but go for it.
Yeah, it's about speed, what you're getting after. How do we get it quickly? We can't build a system and expect it to be in service for 30 years with periodic updates. It's got to be something that we can field quickly, use it, learn from it, adapt it, and this is what Replicator's looking at. This is what other Disruptive Capabilities Office and the Navy stood up is looking at, is how do we do this at scale quickly? I don't know if...
I would offer that it also needs to be looking at it as a commoditized and attritable capability, and that's where that return on investment and quick turn is enabled.
Yeah, I would also add that allowing the industrial base to come to us with solutions rather than having them wait for us to tell them what we want is never a bad idea. You know, sort of a commercial approach.
Can't be a proprietary.
Yeah.
It's got to be
easily
updated with software.
Yep. Sir, one more question.
All right, good afternoon, Admirals. Eric Boer, 3rd Fleet, formerly of Security Assistance Group Ukraine, is the electromagnetic warfare officer. You mentioned how we're gathering, analyzing, and benefiting the data from the Red Sea activities. Are we now gathering that same data, analyzing it, and going to be able to benefit it from Ukraine?
Mike, that's right up your alley.
Yeah, so again, let's separate the land fight from the maritime fight. There's a lot of work going on into characterizing the land fight and the drone situation there that is looking at some of it. It's not all applicable, quite honestly, to the maritime. In the maritime, I'll tell you, I've got additional assistance looking at the things that we need to take away and learn and categorize that data up close and personal. That said, these are not our operations. We are providing security assistance. These are partner forces, and partners are going to do what partners are going to do. What we are doing is providing excellent kit and training for our partners to employ, and we are closely monitoring how they are employed so that we can take lessons learned and tweak and enable that. That cycle is a little longer than what Admiral Dwyer described, when it's simply our operation, our software, our kit. And the other thing I'll say about the partners is you can give them stuff, but that doesn't mean that they're going to just use it. They're going to innovate it and do their own things with it. So it makes it a little harder. You're refracting sort of what you're providing through the lens of what they're actually doing with it. They may modify it, and that's going to change that raw data that you get back. So it's a little more convoluted, but we are trying to take those lessons out, and I'd offer that we're learning a heck of a lot in this fight. Thanks.
Okay, Dan, I want to turn to you for one last sort of question here before I give it back over to Admiral Spicer. We've seen really good examples recently of the frenetic pace at which weapons are consumed in modern combat. It's something we've never seen before, expensive weapons. And there's always been this sort of balance, conundrum between force structure and the weapons side of readiness. And I think we've discovered recently that maybe we got that a little bit wrong, although we're still pursuing force structure. One of the problems is the industrial base sizes itself to what the government asks for. And we usually get a lot of blame in the industrial base for, well, you're not doing enough, you're not big enough, or whatever. But it really is a for-profit enterprise that's going to size itself. Do you see the budgeting process in the Navy accounting for this and amplifying procurement of weapons to refill those magazines and also get to the capacity that we need? Because that's always been a bit of a struggle, right?
We've never been a Jane's Navy where we've got a lot of ships but no bullets, right? We've never been that, but there's a realization that we can never get there.
Yeah.
We have to fully fund and increase our funding to our weapons procurement, without a doubt. We've seen that in the exchange ratios that they're having in Ukraine, the amount of ordnance both Russia and Ukraine is expending against each other, that we're going back and looking at, do we have the numbers right?
Yep.
Is what we're planning for any future conflict accurately reflected in what is in reality that we think we're really going to expend, from missiles, from bullets, from shells, from bombs? And we're having that discussion right now in the Pentagon. There's been a realization that weapons have been a bill payer for a lot of things in the last couple decades. And if we're going to have a ship at sea, it needs to have full magazines and ready to do all missions and all domains.
Of course, it's a hard thing to do because Congress doesn't care if you have a weapons magazine, because weapons magazines don't spend money. Ships do, with maintenance and crew and all that. So I applaud you for having that approach, but it's going to be a tough.
There's a realization in industry, in the service, in Congress, and everyone is fully aligned that we need to really make sure that we have the weapons we need for any future fight.
Good. All right, Ray, over to you.
Admirals, this is exactly why we put this panel together, because the focus right now is on the Indo-Pacific and specifically China in the year 2027. But where's all the conflict? The conflict right now is in the East, and it's in the Middle East. And if we don't learn from those conflicts, I think we're doing ourselves a huge disservice. So this panel was intended to get at some of the things that we're learning that can be applied as we look to the West. So I want to thank all our panelists for a great job. Admiral Winnefeld, great job as always moderating. Admiral Dwyer, thanks for being here. Admiral Mattis, whatever time it is there, thank you for spending some time with us. And as a small token of our appreciation on behalf of both the Naval Institute and AFCEA International, we have a couple of books for you. And the book it's a Naval Institute press book, by the way. The War for Ukraine, and it's by Mick Ryan. So Admiral Mattis will put yours in the mail to you, so thank you.
He's already read it.
He probably wrote it. All right, thank you.